that is the focus of the church. The church's mission is to lead people to Christ. To be honest, sometimes I feel like it fails in that regard. Especially as men, we want to be independent and strong. And so receiving help makes us kind of look weak. But that's not the case at all. All of us need help. And if we can't learn to accept help from others, how can we learn to accept help from Christ? Up to this point, I was still active in the church. I was frustrated because I didn't agree with, hey, let's live in fear. Let's not visit people. Let's not bless people. I was thinking, we have the priesthood. Why can't we just go out and heal the sick the way that Christ or the apostles would? A lot of times, like in the church, I was looking for the prophet, someone to answer the questions I had. Because in the church, it's like everything is laid out for you. We have manuals. We have leaders that we can turn to. The walk really taught me to rely on God in moments where I didn't know how to, like when I was in the desert and I had no water, and I would offer prayer and God would answer me in ways I didn't understand. Joseph Smith taught us that the kingdom of God and the church are two separate things. So your membership in the church doesn't reflect how God feels about you or your stance in the kingdom, because the truth is Christ saves us, not a membership in the church.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 30 of the Clarity Podcast. I'm your host, Claire, and this week's guest was James Thompson. And James has been on quite the walk of his life. And you're going to find out what that means, all this and more on this week's episode of the Clarity Podcast. Everyone has a journey they're walking. And along that road, we are met with potholes, road bumps, rain, storms, and sometimes just fog. But through it all, we're really just looking for one thing: clarity. Clarity so we can walk with confidence in that next step. There's one source I run to for that clarity. In the darkest of nights, Jesus offers me light that shines through even the thickest storms. Welcome to the Clarity Podcast, where we find clarity through the one who saves us all. And welcome to episode 30 of the Clarity Podcast. I'm your host, Claire, and this week's guest is James Thompson. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you guys. As I've been getting to know James the past month, he started telling me some of his story, and I was like, oh my word, you need to come on the podcast. So you guys will probably be just as blown out of the water as I am at some of his stories and his experiences that he's had throughout his life. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right into the questions. James, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and just a little bit about you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I don't have to give my age.
Yes, you have to give your age.
Okay. I was born and raised for most of my life just outside of Detroit, Michigan. And then when I was about 16, my family moved to southern Utah, a little place called Hurricane, or if you live down there, it's Hurricane.
Right?
And I am 35. I currently live in American Fork.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's jump into your childhood. Tell us a little bit about what you were like as a kid, what your family life was like, and kind of the part that the LDS Church played in your life.
Yeah, so let me back up first and just talk about my parents. So I grew up with two amazing parents. Both of them are converts to the church. My mom is from upstate New York, and her parents didn't grow up in the church. Her mom is from Manchester, England, and her dad is from upstate New York. And when she was a little girl, she started having these migraines. And so they took her to the hospital in New York City, and they found out she had a brain tumor. And it was around that time that the missionaries knocked on their door, and they were introduced to the church. And so during that time, my mom had these brain operations, and they removed a portion of her brain. And it was really hard because the doctors and a lot of people in her life told her that, she wouldn't live a full life, that she had maybe 5 years. But because of their faith, she was able to, prove all of these doubters wrong. And she lived a really good life. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But, she was very resilient. She served a mission, finished high school, went to college, raised 5 boys. She homeschooled all of us.
Holy cow.
Can you imagine homeschooling 5 boys?
No.
Yeah, she was a trooper, but she was amazing and had a solid faith. She served a mission in San Jose, California. And as far as my dad goes, my dad also joined the church, but later in his life, I want to say he was in his 20s. He was in the Navy during the Vietnam War, and I think it was a roommate of his introduced him to the church. And I can get into that a little bit later because it's kind of connected to my mission, which is pretty cool. So
Cool.
it's my parents. My parents were amazing, and they did their best to homeschool us. They homeschooled us because we lived, pretty close to Detroit, and so the school system there wasn't great. And they just really wanted to give a foundation for their children that was based around the gospel. And so the church was a big part of my life, scouts, primary, all of that. And I loved it. That was my social life, was my ward, and my brothers, my family.
Okay, so go a little bit more into detail about, what the part the church played. So you went to church every Sunday. Tell us a little bit about your baptism, things like that.
Yeah. So ever since I was a kid, my dream was to be a missionary. Like I loved, and that's because my mom was, and both my parents really were great missionaries. My dad served a mission in San Antonio, and they were just really great at, sharing the gospel with people that they met and having the missionaries over. And so that was always my dream, was to serve a mission. And that also kind of played into what I saw myself doing professionally. So when I was a kid, I was pretty shy, and, I was like kind of an introvert, but at the same time, I knew I wanted to be a speaker. I wanted to speak on stages, just like my mom's brother did and still does. And so that was kind of my vision for most of my childhood of what I wanted to do. And then as I got older, I also developed this interest in cooking, and I wanted to be a chef. I cooked a lot with my mom. And so that was kind of my outlet, because I was super shy and introverted. If I worked in a kitchen, I didn't have to deal with people.
Yep.
So I kind of tossed around that idea and tried to make sense of it. But throughout high school, I worked in restaurants and helped open 2 restaurants in Hurricane, and just really loved cooking. But at the same time, I was really drawn to being a teacher. And I always kind of debated in my mind whether, if I became a chef, how that would influence, or how I could be used in the church. Because for me, it was all about serving in the church and being in leadership in the church. And I just, you don't see professional chefs as leaders in the church, just because it's a different lifestyle.
That's true.
And that was the other thing I struggled with, because I thought, if I ever have a family, you work long nights, and a lot of times the culture is really toxic. And so I was kind of turned off by that. And so I got into sales right out of high school, and that kind of set me on a slightly different trajectory in my early 20s.
Okay. All right. So let's backtrack just a little bit.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about your teenage years, maybe kind of what like your social circles looked like, callings you held, and what part the church played, because we all know that the church is everything when we're growing up and we're in the LDS church. Kind of explain what that looked like in your life a little bit.
Yeah. And I'll also back up because I didn't answer your question about the baptism.
Oh yeah, that too.
I was really excited about my baptism. I know some people in the church, maybe they feel pressure from their family. I genuinely wanted to be baptized and follow Christ. Growing up in my teenage years, because most of my time was in Detroit and then the other part was in Utah. So I served, in my quorum, whether it was as a counselor, and I really enjoyed that, and that kind of prepared me for my mission.
Okay. All right. So let's go into your mission. Tell us a little bit about your mission and the impact it had on you.
Yeah. So right out of high school, I decided to work for a summer. I got sucked into doing door-to-door sales. So
Don't we all?
I moved away to Tampa, Florida, and ended up selling in Florida, North Carolina, and then Virginia Beach. And I think that was one of the best decisions leading up to my mission, because it taught me how to talk to strangers, how to accept rejection, and just really how to, live on my own, right? Which is something that a lot of missionaries don't experience prior to their mission. Mm-hmm. And it allowed me to save some money too. And so I had some experiences doing that, where I was able to help one of the guys that I worked with convert to the church. And that got me really excited about my mission. And while I was living in Virginia Beach, I had a chance to go up to DC. And I always had this feeling that I would serve somewhere on the East Coast. So then the next year, 2000, so this was 2008. At this point, I'm like 19. So I'm ready to go on a mission, but my older brother was just coming back. So I wanted to spend some time with him. And so we decided to do a summer doing door to door out in Philadelphia. So we did that. And then I came back and then submitted my mission papers. And like I said before, I had this vision of me serving in DC. Then I got my mission call and I was called to serve in DC South. And to give you a little bit more context, my parents, they were huge supporters of the Constitution and kind of the freedom movement. They taught us from Ezra Taft Benson and Cleon Skousen. So I had these strong roots, when it comes to politics. And I was really interested in politics. And I even thought maybe one day I'll run for office. And so when I got my mission call to DC, it just made sense. I was really excited about it.
Okay, that's awesome. That is so exciting. So now let's tell us kind of about your experience in the MTC. What was the MTC like? And then you're on your mission. What are your feelings? What are your thoughts? And what were some of the experiences you had?
Yeah, so the MTC, I got sick like a lot of missionaries do. I don't know if it was the food or not, but
it's totally the food.
And it was right around Thanksgiving. So I got really sick. And I think I was just really uptight because, you go in and you're just trying to be this perfect, obedient missionary. And I think I struggled getting along with my MTC companion. He's a great guy, but I was just, super prideful and opinionated about a lot of things. Because you have to remember, this is 2008. So this was an election year. And so I had a lot of thoughts about politics and going to DC and what that meant. And so, but overall, I was only in the MTC for 3 weeks, so it wasn't that bad. And I was just excited to get out into the field and just do missionary work.
All right. So what did the work look like?
Well, because I was pretty familiar with what the people were like on the East Coast. I was used to a lot of the rejection. The East Coast is a really difficult mission to serve. It's very diverse, but you got a lot of people who are kind of stuck in their ways. But wonderful people. Some of the best members I served with were out in, this part of Northern Virginia. And I loved my mission. It was the best experience. Of course, it was challenging, but I built some great relationships. And I knew that for me, my calling in life was to be a teacher. And so I kind of gave up this idea of becoming a chef for a little bit because of that.
Okay. So did you have inclinations so the whole time you were on your mission, did you really feel like your projection was you wanted to be a teacher?
Yeah, because I could tell that was a gift that I was developing, and that because I loved being a missionary so much, I knew that's something that I wanted to do much later on in my life. And all of this is going to tie into some stories we'll get to later on, but it really drove a lot of decisions I made throughout college.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So tell us about maybe one or two of your greatest spiritual experiences on your mission.
Ooh, that's a good question. So there was a family that I got to experience the whole conversion of 3 generations of this family. So we were serving in this area called Gainesville, Virginia. And one of the members in the stake, he was on the high council, had talked to his mailman about, the church. And so I think it was my first day in the area, we went and taught this amazing family. And I had a chance to see them all get baptized throughout. That was at the beginning of my mission. And so by the end of my mission, I was able to see the father baptize his son. His son was, I think, around my age. So that was a really cool experience. And then also I remember in the same area, this was towards the end, about halfway through my mission, I'm in this primarily white congregation, and this family comes in, and this African family, and they, the mother and the children were not members of the church. The husband was less active, and she was actually Muslim. And so were her kids from what I remember. And that was a really neat experience watching them. She actually got up in Relief Society. I didn't know this until later on, but she got up in Relief Society and bore testimony of Christ,
Aww,
which was so sweet.
that's awesome.
And let's see, around that time, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent because these
All right.
two experiences just came to my mind. I remember halfway through my mission, I reached a point of just exhaustion and depression. I found out that my mom was sick, that my dad had a heart attack, my grandmother passed away, and my two brothers were homeless. And so it was pretty heavy, and I got all of this in an email. And so I remember going on exchanges with one of the zone leaders, and we were going to teach this Chinese refugee, or this immigrant who came here, and her name is Donna Sun. And we're teaching her, and one of the members that happened to be on exchanges with us, he's sharing his story. And I'm like, okay, this guy is sharing that he's from upstate New York. And I just had to ask him, I said, maybe he knows my mom and my parents. It turns out he did. Turns out that this random member that was on exchanges with us knew my grandfather, that my grandfather played an instrumental part in his conversion. And what are the chances that we would just get connected like that, right?
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's beautiful.
Uh-huh.
And then towards the end of my mission, I just get the chills thinking about this. The man who introduced my dad to the church was the ward mission leader in Culpeper, Virginia. And we got to go on exchanges like my last day in the mission, which was a beautiful experience. So he would have never guessed that sharing the gospel with this guy, this hippie, my dad was a big hippie during the 60s and 70s, that one day, my dad would serve a mission, and that 30 years later, he would have a son who would serve a mission in D.C., and that we would connect. It's just amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. God is in the details for
Yeah.
sure. Okay, so let's kind of describe to us what your relationship with Christ was like as you were growing up, and then how it increased while you were on your mission.
So since I was a kid, I always loved Christ. I just wanted to know him and follow his example. Sometimes it didn't feel real, but it got more real later on in my life. And I'll get into that later as I had different experiences, because to be honest, after my mission, I kind of went through the motions. I think there were times throughout my childhood and teenage years, mostly my teenage years and my 20s, where I felt like I was just going through the motions of the church, going to church, doing all the things, but not having this deep connection.
Yeah. So do you feel like your connection with Christ increased when you were on the mission?
Yeah, absolutely. I had so many witnesses of Christ and his love for me and his love for his children, and just seeing how people, were being used as angels for others to fulfill Christ's purpose, which is really, it's just to bring us all back to Heavenly Father.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing that you were learning those things. So tell us a little bit about the transition coming home from your mission, and kind of, did your relationship with Jesus kind of increase, decrease? What did your spiritual practices look like? Tell us about singles wards, all that big transition when you come home from the mission.
Yeah. So coming home from my mission was challenging. I was really upset that I had to go home, because I felt like I was finally in this place where I just really loved what I was doing. I didn't want to go back into the world, but I knew I needed to move on with my life. So I came home, and the day I got home from my mission, I had been just released. We were on the way to the hospital to get my TB test, and my mom had a stroke in the car. And so she was in the hospital for 2 weeks. This was over Thanksgiving. And what's interesting is that growing up, my mom told us that, one of the blessings that she received as a child was that she would live to see all of her children grow up. And at that point, my youngest brother, I think, had just turned 18 or something. And so that was kind of a hard experience to go through, because I immediately went up to UVU for college, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time with my mom between coming home, and then, several years later, she passed away. So that really rocked me. But at the same time, I knew I needed to move on with my life. And so college was great. I loved my experience at UVU. I was very involved on campus in student government. And, I was just trying to figure things out, right? Like trying to figure out my career. So I got back into sales because it's something that I was familiar with, something I knew I could do well with. And I was really driven, to be honest, I was really driven by serving in the church. And not just that, it's this duality. Like I genuinely wanted to serve in the church, but I also wanted to be recognized, especially by the women in my ward. Because I saw that. I know this is super cringy to admit on a podcast.
I think it's great.
That a lot of people are going to probably like roll their eyes, but that's the truth of it, is that this sounds so arrogant, but like when I get up and bear my testimony, I thought I could impress the women in my ward because I'd come in and say, I know the church is true. And it's like, it's so silly to me now looking back.
No,
right?
but it's a real thing that I think a lot of us struggle with.
Yeah.
I don't think that's like an isolated feeling. It was no different for me on the girls' side where, I'm teaching gospel doctrine every week and showing up in stiletto heels and dressed to the nines and thinking, I have to have this look and this form of impression on these people. So it's a real thing. Like, and I don't think you're alone in that, because I did some of that too. So when your mom passed away at a very young age, tell us a little bit about like your emotions and your feelings, and maybe how your relationship with God helped you get through that hardship, because losing your mom at a young age is not an easy thing. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. And let me also go back a little bit and explain a little bit more about that period of my life where, dating and, just a stupid return missionary that wanted to date and get married quick. Right. And so one of the first relationships I got into after my mission, we literally talked about marriage. Like the second day we knew each other. I kid you not. Like this is
word.
Like we had planned everything out. We were talking about our children's names, and it's so embarrassing. And then she broke up with me.
Okay. That's so normal though. Again, like you're not alone in that.
It's okay. It is what it is.
LDS culture is a strange place, folks.
But, I just try to do my best to live the gospel and, be a worthy priesthood holder. Mm-hmm. I made a lot of mistakes throughout college, but nothing that I never really felt like a lot of shame about. But still, you just kind of get caught up in the college scene and caring about what people think and being influenced by others. And so I dated a lot, between 2011, 2014. And it was around 2014, I had just ended this relationship because I decided to move to Charlotte, North Carolina to do sales. And I, at that time, it was earlier that year, my mom got sick again. The brain tumor came back. And at this point, she's 56. And I knew that I needed to go down and see her. And so I went down to St. George. And by the way, my dad at the time, he's my hero. He left his job. He quit his job to take care of my mom full time. And that was really amazing. And he was so like faithful and loyal to her like the entire time. She started to lose her memory. Sometimes she would forget, her son's names, and she just started to go downhill. So right before I left to North Carolina, her sister and daughter came out. And so we drove from Provo to St. George, and I saw my mom in rehab. And the last thing that she said to me is, "Don't worry about me. Everything will be all right." And I saw her on Good Friday. And then 3 days later, we made it to Atlanta, and it was Easter. And I got a phone call from my brother saying that she was in a coma and that they flew her up to Salt Lake City and she was unresponsive. So at this point, I knew she was going to pass soon. And then Elder Walker of the 70 came and gave my mom a blessing. My dad, my brother, and I have had some kind of interaction with Elder Walker. Elder Walker came to my mission and spoke to us. Elder Walker ordained my dad as a high priest, And then my brother ran into him at Walmart one time. So that's kind of the reason why Elder Walker came to visit my mom. But yeah, that was a really difficult time because when I found out she passed, I had actually already driven to North Carolina, and I was early out of my team. And so I was by myself, and I had to just learn how to deal with it being alone. I mean, I could call friends and family, but that was a really difficult time in my life. So anyway, I had to go through that. And in some ways, I don't know if I've completely processed or, grieved properly, because I felt like I had to be strong for my dad, who just really had a hard time with it. And so, I moved back to Utah, and this is an interesting thing because this is going to tie into the story later on that we're going to get to. Is one of the first people that was there for me when my mom passed was this guy named Paul Chavez. Paul was my elders quorum president at the time, and he was a really great friend to me when all of this was happening, because I was essentially homeless. I was living out of my car for the first few days because I'm like, I just made this change in my life. I left my job out in North Carolina, and I'm trying to start over again. So Paul was just really a good friend for me during that time.
That's awesome. That's what we need during those hard times. Okay. Yeah. So what happened next? You're going throughout your life. You're going to the singles wards, dating. Kind of continue with what happened next in your life.
Yeah. So at this point, I'm in my mid-20s. So I feel like I have to get pretty serious about my career and, getting married. And so I had received a lot of advice that I should pursue a career in business-to-business sales. And so I started working for Franklin Covey, which was my dream job. And then that kind of got me into other corporate sales positions. And what I found was, like, even though I made pretty decent money, I wasn't happy just going to a 9-to-5. I wasn't happy doing the same thing over and over again. And I looked at people that were there maybe 5 years, more than me, and thought, wow, this is what my life is going to look like. Not that it's a bad life. I'm not saying that. Like, a lot of these people have great lives and great families, but I knew something was missing for me. And losing my mom really taught me, like, life is short. She passed away at 56. And like I said before, I was really driven by purpose and being involved, and so I started to get more involved in politics, and started to do some political consulting, helping run campaigns, traveling. I, worked on a political campaign in Georgia and in Michigan. And what that taught me was, the answer is not necessarily electing a certain person or a certain party. I was so blind at the time, thinking that the Republican Party is the answer for all of our problems. I know that sounds so obvious that, it's not the answer, but I had to go through that experience. And what it did do is it planted some seeds that helped me to care what was happening in the world. But I also got a pretty good idea of, the problems in politics.
All right. So tell us a little bit about your career path, and get more into kind of your career path and what God led you to do and the things that you were learning in that time of your life.
Yeah. So like I said before, I was always conflicted because I had this love for cooking, and, it's a very creative profession, but I just really didn't see myself working in restaurants. I didn't want that to be my life. Mm-hmm. So I found catering, and that, like, really just opened up a way that, hey, I could be an entrepreneur and be in sales and marketing while still doing catering on the side. I started to cater weddings. And then I ended up later on, this is about 2018, I ended up working for one of the premier catering companies in the state, Culinary Crafts. Wow. And that's really, it just lit a fire in me. And I learned so much. I was privileged to work with my mentor, Mary Crafts, who built this empire, and she got to cater the Olympics and for presidents. And it was just amazing. I had some cool experiences catering. And then I decided to do my own thing and would just kind of do freelance catering stuff. And so I would do that. But at the same time, I knew that I could make the most money in sales and marketing. But I was kind of over sales, at least, this type of sales I was doing. So I discovered copywriting or content writing, and that you could make money writing for brands. And so this was around 2019. I got connected with a friend who said that there was a marketing agency in Salt Lake that needed help with content writing. So I didn't really have any experience other than when I was at UVU. I worked as a resume coach, career coach. I was an intern. So I learned that I was really good at reading and kind of picking apart stories. So I went to this agency and said, hey, I'll take out your trash. I just really want to learn this. And they said, okay, well, we'll give you a client to work with. And depending on how you do, we can talk about having you come on. So after that first week, I worked with one of their clients. They loved it. They loved my work, and they hired me on as their head copywriter. So I loved that job so much because I got to work with personal brands, which was great because it was a way for me to kind of use my own voice through other people that had platforms. Like I would work with fitness influencers, had millions of followers, and I got to write content for them. And at that time, I'm just really excited about this career path. Everything is so clear in my life. You know, the direction I'm going in. I'm doing marketing. I'm starting to speak, and I'm also doing catering. And then 2020 happens.
Yep, that changed things for everyone. Okay, so while you were going down your career path, did you feel like you were led by God to the careers that you were led to, or were you just cruising?
Yeah, I think all of this plays an important part of where I am now, and it wasn't by accident. If most people were to ask me about my resume, they'd be like, James, like you're all over the place. But that's okay because life is messy. And the way this is a cooking analogy, but you don't make a delicious dish out of just one ingredient. You use a lot of different ingredients. And so that's kind of how I view life is like, I try not to compartmentalize my life and say like, this is my career, this is my spiritual life, these are my relationships. They all just kind of blend together. And, you know, of course, like now I know exactly what I'm doing with it and how it all comes together. But I'm just really grateful for the choices I made. And to be honest, I just really was never satisfied working for someone else.
Yeah.
And I was always just trying to find something that would fit like my lifestyle and allow me to travel and just be creative and grow and not be capped.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so tell us about the dynamic where, you know, you're in your mid-20s, you're still single, you're in the church. There's so much pressure to not be single when you're in the church. Tell us about your feelings during this time, and were you feeling frustrated in this era of your life, and kind of how did God help navigate that part of your life?
Yeah, so after my mom passed, you know, I was dating a lot, but I also knew that my dad was by himself in St. George, and it didn't sit well with me, especially after learning that he had a heart attack. And I knew I needed to move him up with me. I knew that by doing that, that would also maybe put my dating life on hold for a bit. But that's the promise I made to my mom and what I knew my dad needed. So I convinced my dad to move up to Orem with me. And so he lived with me for about between 2016 to about 2019. And so, yeah, I mean, I still dated, but it was just kind of uncomfortable. Here I am in my late 20s, and, you know, most guys my age have their life put together. And here I am. This is during my kind of adventurous lifetime, or a period of my life where I'm like traveling and trying to figure things out. And so I was like pretty insecure about like trying to get married at this point, because I'm like, I don't know if any girl is really going to want to date someone that's living with their dad. But I also didn't really want to explain the situation.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I was like a little bit guarded, and I just felt like I don't want people to see that part of me. I know that sounds super silly, but so with the church thing around that same time, I felt stuck. You know, I felt like I was just going through the motions. So I stopped going to church actively, and just to see if I could feel a difference. And then I started to come back towards, this was like 2019. And it was around that time that, you know, I started serving in the church again, and I got asked to work in the temple. And, I was ready to start dating again. At this point, I'm 30. So I'm like, okay, I need to really figure this out because apparently, according to some people, you're a menace to society if you're still single when you're 30. So I definitely was. But so I was even considering like going to a foreign country to find my wife. That's kind of where I was. Like I'm not going to say desperate, but that's kind of what it was. But I really wanted that. And I was ready to just move forward with my life.
Did you feel like Mormon culture kind of made you feel that way in a way? Like the pressure to get married? Mm-hmm.
So, I used dating apps and had some success with it. And then also not a lot. And I don't know. Dating just felt exhausting a lot of times. I'm sure you can relate to that.
Yes, I can.
And to be honest, it's like, I don't blame any of the relationships I've been in. It's a lot of it was like me, it's a lot of like me not being like maybe the best partner or not being fully present. Just not setting boundaries was the other thing. That was something that, I really learned was how important boundaries are in dating. And, but to be honest, I'm also really grateful that the church gave me a foundation. The church gave me a foundation of, in some ways, of what I should be like as a priesthood holder. Now, I have some differences with that now, but we can get into that later.
Yeah, no, well, you know what? That's a very common story too. And that a lot of us, I will never give up my Mormon roots. Like those are an important part of my life. And we can't just let go of all the good because there was good that came, right? And so that's probably what you're describing here a little bit.
This is something else that bothered me was the huge emphasis on getting married in the church and the singles ward. Like, don't get me wrong. I believe that's absolutely important, but it almost seemed like, people wanted you to just get married and just move on and progress in the church instead of really developing a relationship with the Savior and becoming. There's a lot of focus on doing, which is important. Don't get me wrong, but becoming is the most important thing in a relationship.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, we see that even in the singles wards and the environment and the culture, and that we're not being taught as these young people how to navigate adult, emotionally and spiritually intimate relationships. We're not taught that. And so it's more of like, let's go play and then we'll get married in the temple and then we've arrived. And obviously we learn, those of us who are single and we're still growing in this space of being single in or out of the church, we're like, real life isn't like that. You have to work through problems and you have to have conversation and communication and all these things that the church was never telling us. I just thought my life would be perfect if I married a returned missionary in the temple. What happens if that doesn't happen in your life? Church doesn't really have answers for that now, does it?
Yeah. And to be clear, I take full responsibility for like my life and I don't blame anything on the church or anyone else. However, here's the thing I wish I would have known throughout my teenage years and my 20s is, ways to approach the natural urges that every man has, right? I was never taught that. And so knowing a lot of things now, I'm like, wow, okay, it's not just about avoiding these things. That's not enough.
Right.
Because there's still a void and they're still hurt. And so what happens is, a lot of guys who don't know how to fill that void or how to heal, they tend to hurt other women in the church. And I don't personally believe that it's always intentional. Maybe it is, but coming from my own personal experience, I just know the times where I've been hurtful in relationships is because I was hurt and I've had to do a lot of healing.
Yeah. Well, and the more we heal, the more we can be those Christ-like people that we're striving to be. But we got to have these conversations and we've got to have hard conversations. And while you're right in that, no, I don't blame the church for all these problems, which I've been majorly accused of in past episodes. But while I don't blame the church, I feel like if we're the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there should be something better happening, some better education and some better teachings that are coming from here. And they're just not. There's just a lack of.
Exactly. I think awareness is so important. And that is the focus of the church. The church is the church's mission is to lead people to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, sometimes I feel like it fails in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's go to 2020. That's where you left off. What happened in 2020 and how did it affect you?
So, at the time my life was going great. Like I'm progressing my career. I started to talk to somebody. I was flying out to Southern California to see this person. And I remember this day, it was January 26th. It was my mom's birthday. And I had just got done seeing this person. And when I got off the plane, I hear two things. Kobe Bryant passed away. He died in a helicopter crash. And this thing called the C virus. I don't know if I should say that on the podcast or not.
The 2020 plague, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm like, so I just like rolled my eyes because I thought this is about a jab. This is not about anything else other than like trying to make people fear.
You knew that like right from the beginning?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Because
what was like your background in understanding those things?
Well, you have to understand, my parents homeschooled us. And so we got a very alternative education. My parents were anti-jabs and very much about holistic health. So I was really aware that even though I did get jabs to go on my mission, I didn't ever want to get them after. So it just, I don't know, maybe it was the spirit. It was just kind of paying attention to what was going on in the world, knowing that it was an election year and that something weird was about to happen. But I just continued with my life, for the next month. And and then as we all know, March 15th, 16th, I was catering a wedding and all of a sudden everything starts shutting down and I can't get ingredients. I can't get flour. I can't get all of the things I needed to do this wedding. And I'm like, what is going on in this world? And that threw everything off in my life. I lost about half of our business and I was just trying to figure out what to do at this point because there's so much fear in the world. And so maybe I should give some more context or background about what is leading up to this. So for most of my life, I would say that I have been a dreamer. And part of that has to do with my Native American heritage. And some of these dreams for me are pretty prophetic. I had a dream back in 2017 where I was with my friend Paul and we were driving by the point of the mountain in Lehi and there was an earthquake. And guess what happened? March 18th, there was an earthquake in Utah. And I thought, oh, that's strange. And then earlier that year, I had a dream where I was flying from Salt Lake to San Francisco. And I remember I was in the plane, I could see the Nevada desert. That's such a random dream. I've never flown from Utah to California. I've always driven if I ever went to California. And so I thought that was weird. And I have these reoccurring dreams too throughout my 20s of me going back to DC and being a missionary. And so when everything is shut down, I decided to take a week off. This was right before Easter to just try to get closer with God. And my friend Paul kept encouraging me to listen to the Chosen series or to watch it. And I finally gave in. And there was one episode, I think it's episode 2, where Christ is calling Peter to leave everything behind and follow him. And it just resonated with me so much. I'm like, this is exactly what I want to do right now. I want to leave everything behind and then just be a missionary and just share the gospel. But I know that's not how the church works, right? If you're going to serve another mission, it's going to be typically later on in your life when you're retired and with your wife. But I just couldn't get this out of me. I'm like, why do I feel this way? But I came back to reality. I'm like, you know what? I need to be responsible and, get married and have a family. And so I'm living my life, right? And I ended up getting a job with this company and the position wasn't exactly what I wanted. I was hoping to kind of move into more of a marketing position, but this job absolutely bored me. But I'm like, well, what else is there to do right now with COVID? I can't cater events. A lot of the things I was doing before, I just couldn't do. And so I created this vision board to give me clarity. And I know.
Awesome.
Which is something that I would do before. And I know it might sound kind of woo-woo to people, but for me, it was inspiring. And so one of the things I would put on the board was this dog, this red-haired Australian Shepherd. And I put, pictures of me hiking and traveling and starting a podcast and telling people stories. And so I would start focusing on like, how can I start accomplishing these things? So then, and by the way, at this point, I'd moved out from my dad's place. I got my own place in Lehigh, and I ended up finding this dog that was on my vision board, and I named him Coda, and he was the sweetest dog. There's a story behind that too. We can maybe talk about after. So I have this cute dog, and again, life is going pretty well despite what's happening in the world. And this is around May, end of May. I get a call from my best friend, Paul. So Paul, to give you more background, Paul was the friend that helped me when my mom passed. We were roommates. We've worked together. We were really close, but he was living in Arizona at the time teaching school. So the year was ending, and he just went through a really bad breakup. So around that time, even before talking to Paul, I had a feeling like something big is about to change in my life. I need to find a different home for Coda. So I did, and returned him back to the previous owner. And I bought a ticket to Phoenix and decided to be there with Paul to help him. And the plan was he was going to move in with me, and we were going to do some road trips maybe or something. So I flew down to Phoenix. We decided to do a spontaneous trip to California. We went to visit one of my clients in Laguna Beach. And this was around June 2nd. So if you remember what happened on June 2nd, the whole George Floyd thing was going on with Black Lives Matter and protests, and there's shutdowns going on. And so while I'm kind of like concerned about what's happening in the country, Paul's over here heartbroken, and is talking about like, I just want to go on a long walk. And I'm like, bro, let's just like walk the beach or something. I don't know. And so we decided to drive up to San Francisco to see his mom. And that's where he grew up. So on our way up there, I'm seeing pictures of people putting Black pictures on social media. And I'm not saying that it was a bad thing or anything, but I was just frustrated. Like, what is this really going to do? Like, I get it, but at the same time, it's not going to create lasting change. It almost seemed virtue signaling in a way. I know I'm probably going to get some hate for saying that, but whatever, because what I just cared more about is like, how can we come together and listen to each other? Because I didn't see things black and white with what was going on with the virus or with the protests. So we're driving up to San Francisco, and I'm just kind of scrolling through, and I said, Paul, there's got to be something more that we can do than just post a Black picture on social media. And he turned to me, he's like, what if we did a coast to coast walk across America for peace? And I turned to him, grabbed his hand, and said, let's do it.
It was that simple.
Yeah, it was like, and we just both kind of felt this is going to sound so weird, but we just both felt this like electric shock run through us. Like, this is what God wanted us to do. And as I was thinking about it, we're like getting closer to San Francisco. I'm like, what did I just commit myself to do? Like, walking across America. I only knew of one other person that did that, and it was Mike Posner. He walked across America in 2019. He's a musician artist. And so I'm thinking, but this just makes sense. Like, I feel like a lot of the experiences in my life were preparing me for this. This for me. So I'll share why I did it, and then I'll share what Paul wanted to do with this walk. There are some different layers to this. So for me, it was an opportunity to fulfill that desire I had to be a missionary again and to go preach the gospel. But I didn't lead with that because I knew maybe not everyone would resonate with it. Even though I had so many opportunities to testify of Christ and to share the Book of Mormon with people across the walk. It was really about highlighting the good in the country because the media was just showing all of the bad, like cops are bad or, all the things, right? Like this fear mentality. I'm like, we can't be living in fear.
Right.
So for Paul, it was more about like, it was a way for him to heal, like to go inward. And it was about the actual walk. Yeah. But for me, it was more about the interactions. And I kind of thought God is using my talents to be able to write stories and, connect with people to broadcast a message of hope. So we get to San Francisco and we spend a few days there, and I'm just getting so nervous because we start planning everything out. We decide to walk from San Francisco to D.C., where I served my mission. So there's some significance because San Francisco in a way is kind of this place of peace and then DC is like the opposite of that. But DC still has a really special place in my heart. But we also wanted to do it coast to coast. So we decided the bonus destination would be Virginia Beach, which is cool because I used to live there. So we said, well, if we're going to do it now, this was June 2nd. We actually left 4 years ago tomorrow. So we decided the only thing we need to do is we need to go back to Utah. I need to sell everything. I need to sell my car. I need to, just buy a backpack, and we're just going to follow Google Maps. So that's literally, see, sometimes guys don't really think about things.
No, they don't.
And so, but I had this confirmation. I'm like, I told Paul, we were at this park out in Concord. I'm like, we're going to see miracles and angels are going to be with us. And I said, now that we've committed to this, like, I think God's going to start testing us to see if we're really going to follow through, because a lot of people talk about doing this kind of thing, but don't actually do it. So on our way back to Utah, we're like on our way back to a birthday party for a friend of mine. And we were somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, and it was raining a little bit. And we noticed there was a truck flipped over on the other side of the freeway. So we pulled off, ran over, and this lady was unconscious in her truck. All these people came over to help. And what was so amazing about this, especially at this time with all of the division going on in the country, is seeing the kind of people that were there. It was a black guy, a woman, Asian guy, a nurse, like a police officer. And it was just so amazing to see all these people. I'm like, this is it. This is like, to me, this was a sign that like, this is what God wants us to show the world, the love that humanity really has, and that people are good, really. And so I thought that was amazing. I wrote this post and it blew up, and I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. And I hadn't announced that we were doing this walk yet. But when we did, I got a lot of pushback from some people that were close to me. And a lot of people thought I wouldn't do it or I would quit. And that was really hard to hear.
Really? Huh. Why do you think people were giving you pushback?
Well, like I said before, I've been kind of flaky in some areas. Not flaky, but I've just, I've gone through a lot of jobs. And so maybe they just didn't see that consistency in my life. And so they kind of projected that on this thing that I wanted to do.
Did that like light a fire under you to do it even more?
Yeah, absolutely did.
Yeah.
So, when we got back to Utah, we started to put things together, and I just started to see miracles from the very beginning. Like, I couldn't find the title for my car, which made it impossible to sell the car so I could have the cash to like partially fund. I basically drained everything to do this walk. And I prayed, and the next day the title came in the mail and I was able to sell the car. So it was just amazing to see how everything just kind of lined up. But then as Paul was talking to this friend of mine that I met earlier that year through a study group, her name is Katrina. Katrina had a huge crush on Paul, and we'll get into that later on. But Katrina is like, so you guys are walking across America. How are you guys going to get across the desert? We hadn't really thought about that. We're just like, God's going to provide for us.
Of course.
We're like 700 miles of nothing. Sure. We'll like have someone drop water off or something. I don't know. But we were just both really excited about it. Mm-hmm. So Katrina offered to be our support driver because she was working remotely. And I think it was more because she really liked Paul at the time. And so we decided that might be the best way to go, that she would support us in these different moments of the walk where we didn't have access to food or water. She could do her laundry. She was an angel to us. She was one of our first trail angels. So we leave June 23rd. We get out to San Francisco, and, those first few days, I was just there a couple of days ago, and it brought back a lot of memories. I was on top of the world. I just felt like, wow, like we have so many people supporting us, and like we're doing this, right? And then we did like maybe 19 or 20 miles that first day. It's not like I was in super great shape to do this. It's not like I was training for this. Like, how can you train for something like this?
Right.
I mean, you can, but I wasn't. And so those first few days were hard because there was a lot of rough terrain, like going through Mount Diablo, and first few days I had blisters. My feet were cracked and bleeding, and it was hot. And, Paul and I started to butt heads, as you can imagine being with someone. Both have different ways of doing things, right?
Yeah.
I was very much about these interactions with people, and Paul was very much like, no, we need to like get into beast mode and like do 20, 22 miles a day, especially because we didn't want to do this walk for like an entire year. We were like, we want to do this maybe in 6 months. And then the other thing too is because of what was going on with the country, a lot of people were fleeing to these national parks, which made it more difficult to get a pass to go through Yosemite. So that was the other challenge. It was a miracle that we were able to get a pass, but we had to go through Yosemite during a certain period of time, which meant we couldn't like slack off walking. So there's just so much to cover during this first week. There's so much that happened.
So what were some of your hardest moments in the first week? What were some things that you didn't think would be hard, but they were already hard within the first week?
Ooh. Well, of course, like learning to make decisions together was really challenging because up until that point, I mean, aside from my mission, but even on your mission, most everything is already planned out for you. So you don't have to like decide necessarily on every single thing, but now we do. And I'm a pretty independent person. And so I wanted to do my things my way, and Paul wanted to do things his way. And so we had to learn to just kind of compromise and work together. And that was hard. The physical aspect of it was just so uncomfortable walking 15 to 20 miles every single day in the heat. And, but at the same time, we had so much encouragement. We started to do these news interviews, and we got a lot of support and recognition through that. Like we reached a lot of people. I never went viral on social media, but I don't think that's really what it was about. And I think if we did, that would have made my ego even bigger than it is. I think God recognized like, James has a big enough ego. Like we'll just have him have these interactions with people one-on-one. That's really what it was about. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was just really just trying to find our flow, like how we worked together and how we communicated with each other. And just this constant making decisions, because you take an extra break that could have delayed us 2 days, right? Mm-hmm. It just all adds up.
Yeah, definitely. So I really love this because there's a little bit of a life analogy here, in that obviously all of us have not walked across the US, right? But all of us are walking these journeys in our lives that, this is what my whole podcast is about. You hit road bumps and heat and storms and hardships. What is it that kept you going? What is it that kept you putting one foot in front of the other?
Yeah. So, at the core for me, it was like, I just knew that God wanted me to do this, and just like my love for Christ. And it was a walk for peace, but it was a walk for Christ. That's really what it was. And I knew like the other part of it was the growth that I would experience from it. I knew that I would come out being a completely different person. Going back to what your earlier question was about challenges is, I had to learn from the very beginning to let go of things, like let go of like physical things, let go of expectations, let go of ego. And when I made it to the airport, I got a phone call from someone offering me a job that would have made me a good amount of money, but I had to turn it down because it would have been a distraction from the walk. So really just trusting God helped me get through that, and reflecting on the experiences that we had, because I think it was the second day we were going through Tracy, California. And for some reason we had like ran out of water, and we'd have people that would just pull over and just give us like Gatorade or water or money. But I remember Paul has done door-to-door sales as well, but we put in our door-to-door knocking experience and started knocking on people's doors to ask for water. That's how desperate we were.
Really?
Yeah.
And how was that received by the people whose doors you were knocking?
Well, so here's the thing is like, I didn't look like a threat. Not that Paul does either, but Paul is starting to grow a beard. And so I just know later on, I might have been more approachable. So people didn't really answer their doors with us initially, but we did have one lady who gave us some water. And she told us later on that that day that we met her, everything in her life just started to change, and she started to donate to our campaign. And just her relationship with her family started to improve, and she was blessed with a job. And it's just amazing what happens when you go out of your way to serve others, which, by the way, that was also a super uncomfortable thing for me, is allowing others to serve me, because here I am, I'm really capable of taking care of myself, but I had to allow people to serve me. And I didn't feel comfortable asking people for money, because I was really afraid of being perceived the wrong way and being misunderstood. And so I know I have some people in my life that probably didn't take the time to really ask, like, James, why are you walking across America? Maybe they thought, oh, James is just, taking the next 6 months to go on an adventure and just to rely on other people, and just, people come up with silly things. And I had to just learn to block all of that out.
Okay. So tell us a little more about this dynamic where, we're not taught in the LDS church to accept service from others. That's another thing that really isn't taught too much, but we're taught about serve, but it's mostly in a church capacity. It's in capacities that are comfortable, right? So tell us kind of what that did to your spirit in learning the importance of asking for help and being in a position where you needed help, and maybe tell us some stories where you kind of grew in that department.
Yeah, I love that, because, especially as men, we want to be independent and strong. And so receiving help makes us kind of look weak, but that's not the case at all. Like, all of us need help. And if we can't learn to accept help from others, how can we learn to accept help from Christ?
Right.
It's, the humility is really the biggest thing when it comes to receiving. And it's also allowing the person that's offering help to receive those blessings that come from serving others. So let's see, I'm thinking about some experiences that we had. Okay. We were in Groveland, California. So this was July 4th, and it's really hot. And I was a little bit further ahead than Paul, because we were trying to make it to Yosemite by a certain time. And Paul and I had this agreement that we were going to walk every single step of the way. And that's really what I wanted to. But I was going through this canyon, and there was this reservoir and this, I don't know if it was a mountain, but I was like hiking this switchback, and it was like 90 degrees. I've got this backpack on. I'm out of water. I'm out of food. And I still had like 7 miles left to walk to get into town. And this group of people keep passing me in their side-by-sides. And they're like, do you want to ride? And I'm like, no, I'm good. And after, I think it was the second or third time, I'm like, whatever, I'm just going to mark my spot. I'm going to accept the ride and go into town and just get something to drink. This group was awesome. And I hope if they end up watching this, they just know how grateful I am for them, because they came into my life at a time where I was like really struggling. And it's like, we're starting to get into kind of some sketchy parts of the country, like bears and mountain lions and stuff are in this area. So I'm like super aware of like my surroundings. Anyway, but they take me to this pizza parlor in Groveland, and this is a group of people that were, recovered from alcohol abuse and turned their life to Christ. So we just had this immediate connection, and it was so beautiful. And they fed me, and then they gave me some food, and we went back and found Paul. And anyway, that was super amazing. But when that happened, there was some miscommunication that took place. Paul thought that I had just like accepted this ride. And so there's some miscommunication that took place. And Paul just said, you know what, I'm just going to walk that portion. So how about you go into town and find a place for us to sleep for the night? I was like, okay, because at this point my feet are just so blistered and like it's painful to walk. So I happened to find an LDS church, which I always felt really comfortable. Like, if I can just find an LDS church in this community, I have a place to sleep. So I'm setting up my sleeping bag. I didn't want to set up a tent because I didn't want to draw attention to myself. And I'm trying to go to sleep. I'm still like kind of paranoid about bears in the area. I know. And so I'm like trying to sleep, and then this car pulls up, and I'm like, oh shoot, it's the cops. Because we had been kicked out. We were sleeping on the side of a road. Our first, I want to say it was right out of Pittsburgh, California. We just got done backpacking through Mount Diablo, and we had like been kicked off somebody's property that apparently we were sleeping on. And so I was always paranoid about like, okay, I'm going to have to get my stuff in the middle of the night and go find another place. And it's just exhausting. And I'm like, I just need a place that's safe where I can sleep, get re-energized. So I'm thinking, oh boy, here we go again. We have somebody that's going to kick me off the property. And they said my name. I'm like, who the heck is this person? And it was Paul. What happened was when Paul got into town, into Groveland, he stopped at this convenience store, and he was getting some drinks, and he had said thank you to the cashier and called them by name. And the lady behind Paul was like, who is this guy? And like, why does he have this big backpack? Not that that's super unusual to see in Yosemite, but they struck up this conversation, and Paul said, yeah, me and my friend are walking across America. And she's like, what? Her name is Tammy. Tammy's like, do you need anything? And Paul's like, yeah, we could use a place to sleep. And she's like, well, I've got a bed and breakfast. So long story short, they come and find me, and we get to stay at her place. And that's another story. We could go into that whole thing. But Tammy, I just talked to Tammy a few days ago, and Tammy is such an angel to us, and so grateful for her and being willing to just accept that love that she had for us. So I could go on about other stories too.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that when we learn how to accept love and service from other people, it then opens us to want to return that service and then be loving and serving other people. And it gets rid of this discomfort we have around helping other people and accepting help from other people. And it sounds like that's kind of what you were learning, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So now tell us a little bit about your experiences interacting with other people and being able to share the gospel, because in a sense, then you're serving other people with your spirit and with the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So tell us a little bit about those experiences.
I think one of my first experiences was when we were still in the Bay Area. I brought like 3 or 4 copies of the Book of Mormon with me, and I handed it to this lady that was homeless. I don't know what she did with it, but every opportunity I would testify of Christ and that he's returning soon. And, that just like gave me a fire, because I'm like, this is really why I'm out here. I'm out here to testify of Christ, not to position us as these heroes who are walking across America. It really wasn't about that, because the walk was so imperfect. And I wasn't always positive on the walk. There are many times where I complain or swore at Paul or something, and just, realized that this was really about Christ. I will share an experience that just comes to my mind walking through Nebraska. I was by myself. Paul might have been behind me, but it was really cold and windy. This was November. So actually, I'm sorry, this was October, and I'm like feeling really discouraged. I'm like, what is the point of this whole thing that we're doing? But I'm just doing the walk, and this car pulls up, this like really old, like maybe 1993 Buick or something pulls up, and it looked like it was about to fall apart. And this couple, they rolled down the window, and they didn't speak any English. I think they were from maybe Cuba. And I'm trying to use Google Translate to communicate with them and say, hey, I'm walking across America. Turns out they were on the way to the hospital to take the wife who was in pain. And they stopped to see if I was okay. And then they got out of the car, put their arms around me, and, prayed with me and gave me $20. I didn't ask for that, but that was such a beautiful experience. I've got so many other, I guess I could backtrack, because there was an experience in Nevada. So at this point, Katrina had been with us, and we decided to take a few days off. We were, I think, close to Tonopah, and we were going to go down to Las Vegas to visit my mission president. And I had this distinct feeling that we needed to stop at this store. And, we were getting some beef jerky and drinks, and we ended up talking to this guy who, I want to say, I think he had been to prison and his life was just really difficult. Don't quote me on this, but he said that us stopping to talk to him and sharing the love of Christ with him just made a huge difference. And he came and gave us this amazing hug. And it was another example of like how the Spirit guided us to this person, and that the walk was really about people and not really like what we were doing. And you can relate that to your own life.
Oh, I love what you're saying here, where the walk, it became about people. I think that's a lesson a lot of us miss while we're going on our walk in life, right? It's like we're just trying to go through the motions and we get caught up in being busy and checking the boxes. This is in the church or any part of your life, career. And life is really about people, because you can't separate God's children from God. You just can't. And so when we learn to really love God, we then learn to share that love with the people around us. And that's what you're doing. And you're just illustrating it in a very real way in your life and on this walk that you went on. So maybe tell us about some of the cleansing that was happening within you and the changes that were going on in your heart that God was doing within you as you're doing these really hard things and serving these people and being served. What were some of the changes taking place in your heart and your spirit?
Yeah, the scariest part of the walk was not the encounters I've had with mountain lions or other wild animals. It wasn't people. It wasn't like being lost up in the mountains. It was being alone with my own thoughts for hours. That's something that none of us really have the opportunity to do because we're constantly bombarded with things or distractions. There were times, even though I had my cell phone, I couldn't always use it because I had to preserve my battery so I knew where I was going. Or there were times where I didn't have cell service or my phone died. And I have to just be okay, like with my own thoughts. And so I would say that experience really allowed me to go deep. And, you asked earlier about like, what was my motivation? It was different from time to time, to be honest. Like when I was walking through the desert, we had switched our walking schedule from the morning and day to night so we could avoid the heat. The problem with that is it does get creepy because that's when all of the predators are out at night. So you hear a lot of things and you don't know what's around you. And, that's when you're supposed to be sleeping. So it was a struggle. And I would have to find different things to motivate me. And sometimes that was, like, hey, if I walk to where that tree is, I'm going to reward myself with something next time I'm in town. And so for me, part of that cleansing was really understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing and recognizing that it's okay to sometimes have surface level reasons for doing things. It's not always a bad thing. It would be ideal for us to be constantly motivated by the best thing, which is Christ, but sometimes that just wasn't there. And I think God understands that. But yeah, it really just being physically active and just constantly going through this battle with myself, like really helped me understand like kind of a glimpse into my potential. And, it taught me to, like I said before, to learn to let go. And I remember one time we were at this, it was like a rest place in Nevada. It was like one of the only spots in like 400 miles that we'd been to where we could like use the restroom and fill up on water. And there was a homeless dude there named Steve. And he'd been riding on his bicycle for like 40 years, apparently. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but like apparently he's just been wandering around. And he came up. Well, no, Katrina gave him some of our food. Like gave him some, and I was like, Katrina, what are you doing? Like, why are you giving this person our food? And I realized like how selfish that was, to like even think that, but that's okay, And so part of the purification process was not judging myself for some of the thoughts I had that were selfish, and just raising this level of awareness that I had, because when you spend that much time with yourself, like you have no other choice other than going crazy, because yeah, that's really is either you can be aware of your own thoughts and your actions and your behaviors, or you can just continue in this cycle of insanity.
There's a lot of truth to what you're saying there. And I haven't walked across the US, praise God, but I have had chronic illness. And in that experience, you have to be alone with yourself a lot. And, you do see a decline in the chronic illness community where you either kind of decide that you're going to be responsible for what you are in control of and be the best that you can be in that certain situation, or you just kind of decline and you just kind of start to streamline through life. And so part of that self-awareness that we have is important so that we can continue to grow and become better in these things and not just stay stagnant in the things that we're not so good at. And that's part of the human experience. So I think that's a really important lesson that you were learning there. So, okay. How long did your walk last total?
So it was about 6.5 months. So June 24th, 2020. And we finished, a spoiler, because I'm writing a book. And so I want people to read the book, but we made it to DC the day before January 6th.
All right. So what was like your peak of like, this is way too hard? Did you ever have moments of like, this is way too hard and I don't want to do it, I want to quit? Do you ever have moments like that?
Yeah, there were two places that I remember. Nevada, where I was really frustrated and Paul and I weren't getting along. And Nebraska was really hard. Like it was Colorado, Nebraska. I think I'd hit a wall and I was just so depressed. And I'm like, and it was also because it was getting colder and the sun wasn't out. And so, and maybe there were some days we didn't have as many interactions. And so it made it really difficult to see the big picture of everything. But once I got past that, I pretty much was just like, it was all uphill from there.
Okay. So what did you do to get past it? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, I would reach out to people, and it was really uncomfortable to be that vulnerable every single day, because a big part of the walk was sharing on social media and sharing our experiences. And I didn't like to be on camera. I was very self-conscious, and Paul would want to go live. And I'm like, dude, I don't want to be on camera right now. Like, I look gross. Like I haven't showered in days. And that sounds super weird for a guy to say, but like I was self-conscious and
right.
I would reach out to people and get their perspective, and just like reminding myself that eventually this was going to be over, that I would go back to my life, and that if I quit, then I would regret, and I would give permission for my children to quit things. So I use my children, as funny as this might sound, but I would use my children a lot of times as motivation. For instance, when I was walking through Nevada, I would listen to this podcast about a guy, I'm not going to say his name, who would go on these rescue missions to save children. And in my mind, I would play this scenario where it's like, I have to keep going because there is a child that needs me to do this, to be there. And so I would use that as motivation sometimes. And I would just have conversations with myself.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely see that. All right. So let's kind of transition to the end of your walk. Maybe tell us about what that was like, what it was like for it to end, and the things that you were feeling, the accomplishment, all that stuff.
Yeah, there's just so many experiences I want to share. I just got to share this one experience.
Yeah, go for it.
Because in 2019, I was at a concert with my brother in Vegas. And at the end of the concert, I was ready to go back to my hotel room and sleep. And this guy comes up to me and he's like, "Did you record any of the concert?" And I was like, "Yeah," but didn't really care to like share any of it with him. And so I decided to, and we connected. His name is Jobber. And I didn't really know much about him, but we connected on Instagram. And when we posted about our walk, it turns out that he actually lived pretty close to where we were going to walk through Bloomington, Illinois. Now, Jobber is from Kuwait. And I didn't know this at the time, but he comes from the royal family. And he became one of our first sponsors for the walk. And when we got to Illinois, he offered to let us stay at his place for a few days, and he fed us, and that was amazing. And they took us up to Chicago over Thanksgiving, and he took us out to this really nice restaurant, and he made 50 sack lunches, and we were able to give them out to the homeless. And that was a beautiful experience. And towards right before we left and continued on the walk, Paul and I had a tradition of praying together. Even if we were fighting, we'd always just try to pray together before we started the day. And you have to remember that Jobber comes from a different faith background than we do. And Jobber like put his arms around us and we prayed with him, and that was really beautiful. But this is where it gets really interesting. So it was a few weeks later, we're walking through the panhandle of Cumberland, Maryland. And you have to remember that throughout the walk, like we didn't really ask people to donate to the walk. A lot of the funds we did receive, we would give it to certain charities, but we would use the funds that we received to buy food and supplies and that kind of thing, occasionally stay at a hotel if we could. But I always made it a point, like I didn't want this to be about raising money. Like I knew that God would provide for us, and he did. And we got to this point where we're like pretty much out of funds, and we were in Ohio. And I told Paul, from here on out until we finish, like we're going to have a place to sleep. Because for me, the biggest struggle was always trying to find a place to pitch our tent, some place that was safe. And we weren't out west anymore. So it was much more difficult because there was a lot more homes and more difficult to just like pitch our tent. So, and it was cold too. So I told Paul, I was like, we're going to have a place to sleep. I remember this one day, I'm thinking to myself, we're going to probably have to sleep in a tent. I don't want to ask anyone. I could have asked anyone for money, but I just decided to express gratitude. And so the first person that came to my mind was Jobber and everything that Jobber did for us. And, I kid you not, for the next hour, I would usually listen to music to get me kind of in this state of gratitude. And I would just express gratitude for Jobber, and I would just let it go. Like grateful for everything Jobber did for us. And I could pull up the text message, but like Jobber sends me a text and says, James, I had a feeling that you were calling my name. And I'm like, oh, that's so weird, because I haven't shared anything about this on social media about us needing a place to stay. He said, I got you guys a place in the next town. And God heard my prayer. It wasn't a traditional prayer of like, God, please like help us get a place to sleep. It was like me expressing gratitude. And I think that's what connected me with Jobber, is because we were both kind of in this frequency of gratitude and love. And so sometimes it's important just to express gratitude. We don't even need to ask.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. We all need to learn that all throughout our lives. So that's beautiful. Okay. End of the walk. What was that like?
End of the walk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I'm getting close to the end, and there's just a lot that happened prior to this that I'll leave out, but I'm ready to like get on with my life. But I'm also feeling a lot of anxiety leading up to getting back to DC. And I didn't know what that was from, but I remember walking through the Appalachian Mountains and feeling this anxiety. We're about a week away from reaching DC. And I see the sign that says, be still and know that I am God. I'm like, okay. But the anxiety is not going away. So we're like walking through the Old Dominion Trail in Northern Virginia. And it's January 4th. We're with friends from UVU that walk with us. And I just remember as I was walking up the stairs to the Lincoln Memorial and feeling kind of like, wow, we did it. We made it to DC. Like all we have to do is walk down to Virginia Beach. We got this. And I remember feeling like something crazy is about to happen. I don't know what it is, but 2 days later we go to DC, back to the Capitol. And that morning I went to the Capitol building, and I remember thinking like something's off here. Like there's supposed to be this huge rally for Trump, at the mall, and it's freezing. My sister-in-law texts me saying that there's like a bomb threat at the Capitol building. And I'm like, okay. And I tried going live on Facebook, but I couldn't. Just about everyone can like use their phones. And so anyway, we were there for what happened on that day. And I won't go into too many details about that, other than I had a prompting for us to leave when we did. We were on the metro, and then I started getting text messages from friends and family like, were you there at the Capitol when it was being raided? And I was like, no, we left. But that gave me a lot of anxiety between walking from DC to Virginia Beach, because now I'm like, what is going on in this country? Because I don't believe what the media is saying is the complete truth. I don't know what is happening. So anyway, we made it down to Virginia Beach, and it was a beautiful experience because we didn't leave it on that kind of anticlimactic note. Like we did a walk for peace and we show up to DC and this whole thing happens, right? Mm-hmm. Virginia Beach is a very peaceful place, and we ended up meeting up with a group of people in Salisbury, Maryland at the very end. And Salisbury is known as Kindness City, USA. And it's amazing how they just kind of come together and they take care of the homeless. They celebrated the walk that we did, and it was so beautiful. And they gifted us with, cards and, different things. And we had the media come out, and that was really like the best way to end the walk, was just these amazing people from Salisbury. And so, yeah, that was the walk. I know I'm leaving out a lot, but
that's awesome. Okay. So let's give a little bit of context for our audience. What was your stance with the church while you were taking the walk?
Yeah, good question. So, up to this point, I was still active in the church, but I was frustrated because, I didn't agree with this, hey, let's live in fear. Let's not visit people. Let's not bless people. I was thinking, we have the priesthood. Why can't we just go out and heal the sick the way that Christ or the apostles would? Mm-hmm. I really struggled with that. And then as I was walking through the Rocky Mountains, I was listening to the October conference, and I heard Elder Christofferson refer to the United Nations and, the Agenda 2030 plan. And it just didn't sit well with me, because I knew, learning from President Benson and other sources, that the United Nations is not good. So that didn't sit well, but I didn't really make sense of it. And so, yeah, throughout the walk, I struggled with the church and wondering, why isn't the church taking more of a leadership role in promoting faith and healing, and not just like bowing down to these corrupt governments and organizations? It didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. Okay. So then how did that kind of transition into your awakening and into the space that you are in now?
Yeah. So throughout the walk, I'd have this conversation with myself. Like, I don't want to go back to the person I was before. And not that I was a bad person or anything, but I was much more aware of my behaviors and my beliefs, and just overall more aware, and could challenge things and could challenge that things are not always as they seem. Because being there in DC on January 6th, I know the media wants to paint one side, but there's usually multiple different perspectives that we have to understand. And so coming back from the walk, early 2021, I was, to be honest, like I was just kind of putting my life back together. I had visualized towards the end of the walk, my life, like getting a brand new car. I got that like within a few weeks of coming back from the walk. Blessed with a really great job. Started to date somebody, and everything in my life was going really well. I'm like, I'm being blessed because I did what God wanted me to do. But then God decided to throw a curveball.
As he so often does when we need to grow.
Yeah.
Yep. What was the curveball?
Was not expecting that, because like I said, my life was going really well at this time. This was around March, April 2021. And there was a big push for this jab. And like I said before, I knew instantly that that wasn't good and wasn't from God. So that led me to question things like, what is really going on? But I've always known that the Book of Mormon was scripture. So I'm like, I'm trying to make sense of this. And I remember one day I was coming home from my brother's birthday party, and the Spirit telling me, don't worry about any of that. Just focus on the second coming of Christ. I was like, okay. So I started to research everything I could about that. And then that led me to watching this documentary about Joseph Smith. And that led me to participating in some group studies.
All right. So what was the documentary you watched?
It's called The Return of Joseph Smith.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So And I'm really grateful because when I watched that film, it helped me understand D&C 101 and 103 in a different light. I don't know how many times I read that in seminary or as a missionary, but my understanding of the parable of the redemption of Zion was always that was something that Joseph did in Zion's camp. And I didn't understand that that was actually a reflection of where the church is today. That the church fell under condemnation, just as it always has in times. And in the Book of Mormon, we see this pattern. Mm-hmm. And, that kind of started to open my mind to like, what's really going on? Why is the church promoting this poison? And why is the church aligning with these organizations? And then I started to ask questions I never thought I would ask.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what were some of those questions that you started asking?
Well, so I started to listen to this group's podcast about the doctrine of Christ and what that really was, and started to learn these alternative views of church history, that the church fell under condemnation shortly after it was organized. And that, for instance, Joseph never taught or practiced polygamy. That was a thing that was new to me. Mm-hmm. And also that, I might not have received the baptism of fire and the Holy Ghost when I was 8, which can explain why I had, a lot of destructive behaviors in my life.
So how was God kind of guiding you through this, and what were some of the answers you were getting to these questions and kind of your involvement with this group?
So this became an obsession for me, maybe unhealthy in a way, because at the time I was dating somebody and I was just so hungry for the truth and wanting to make changes in my life that I was willing to sacrifice everything again. And fortunately I had been through that already. I'm like, look, God, like I'll give up this again. Like, I just want to get to the bottom of this. And so that kind of made things uncomfortable in the relationship I was in, because I don't know if she was really comfortable like going on the same path and asking the same questions. I didn't care though, because I'm like, I just need to know the truth. And so that led me, as I started to ask these questions, like, is polygamy and D&C 132 really of God? Mm-hmm. Other things like the plan of salvation, like, is this really our only shot at mortality? Mm-hmm. Or do we get many? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Other doctrinal things, baptism, the endowment, seeking the face of Christ. All of these things were just so like not necessarily new, because I always believed that we could see the face of Christ, but things just started to come together after I started to study Isaiah and the scriptures in a different light.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you were studying Isaiah. What kind of things did Isaiah do to kind of open your eyes?
Well, my understanding of Isaiah, and it's so limited right now, but it's really understanding where the church is today and kind of how prophecy is going to be fulfilled. And so that just started to make the Book of Mormon click a little bit more, and I could make sense of the doctrine of Christ. For instance, that, the new and everlasting covenant is not polygamy. It's not temple marriage. It's not marriage. I mean, not that marriage isn't an important covenant, but it's a broken heart and contrite spirit. Christ himself teaches that in the Book of Mormon. That was his life. He lived a life of having a broken heart and contrite spirit. And so that really changed my perspective on everything, because now my focus is shifting. Like, of course, I'm still wanting to get married and have a family, but I'm like really wanting to develop my relationship with the Savior, because like this is what's going to bring me closer to the Father, not getting married in the temple, which was just so heartbreaking for me, because that's what I wanted throughout my entire life. And so Isaiah like really put things in perspective, but even since, I've had to kind of deconstruct a lot of beliefs I had during that time.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the process that all of us go through on this journey, where it's just deconstructing and figuring out what is true and what was just tradition. So tell us a little bit about kind of what happened with this group that you were in, your involvement, and then how it kind of teetered out of your life.
This was a super vulnerable moment in my life where I was just willing to accept truth however it came. And I think overall the group that I was part of, they were genuine. They really want to seek after the truth. Unfortunately, anytime there's a movement that's happening, someone tends to hijack it or kind of take the lead. And I think that's the problem. I'm not going to talk about who this person is. I love and appreciate him, what he's taught me. And I just know for myself that a lot of times, like in the church, I was looking for the prophet. I was looking for someone to answer the questions I had. Because in the church, it's like everything is laid out for you. We have manuals, we have, leaders that we can turn to. But the walk really taught me to rely on God in moments where I didn't know how to, like when I was in the desert and I had no water, and I would offer prayer and God would answer me in ways I didn't understand. So I kind of used that as a reference point, my walk, to navigating through this really confusing time. But yeah, overall, like I'm really grateful for the relationships I developed in this community, all of the things I learned. But eventually I noticed that maybe there's a little bit more focus around seeking after this Davidic servant and less about like developing that relationship with Christ. It's almost like we didn't really, I'll speak for myself, almost like I didn't really learn my lesson from the church. I'm still looking for this Davidic servant that's going to come in and save the day. The reality is that's Christ. And the other reality too is it's also us. You can disagree with this if you want, but the other part of it is like Christ expects us to do something and not just wait around for things to happen. Like I think Christ expects us in a lot of ways to build Zion in our own lives.
Yes, I love that. That is the message throughout my entire chronic illness journey, where it's like we are supposed to be servants of God. And when we move into a position to be servants of God, our whole life changes. And you really are living at one with Christ. And it's beautiful. And I see this in like your describing of your transformation, and it's beautiful. So tell us about your stance with the church now, kind of how you navigate that and how you feel about the church now that you've gone through this group, and all of your views about prophets. Where do you stand with the church now?
Yeah, I haven't shared this openly. I love the church. I'm grateful. I was going through a grieving process between 2021 and just this last year. So it was about 3 years that I was really bitter and resentful and just, confused. Like why would the church leadership hide certain things in church history? And, feeling a little bit paranoid, to be honest, too, about things going on in the church, abuse. And so I stopped going to church for a few years, and, it was really difficult because I lost hope for a long time, because now I'm like, well, before the path was so clear for me when it came to getting married and how to raise my family. And I know that a lot of people that leave the church tend to throw everything out the window. And I didn't want to do that. Like I still accepted Joseph Smith as a prophet and the Book of Mormon as scripture. And even a lot of the church teachings are beautiful, but it made it more confusing. Like, okay, like how do I find somebody, and will I find somebody? And I had to just learn to let go again. And where I am now is I just have so much love and appreciation for the church and the leaders and the members. And even though I'm not active per se, I don't personally have an issue with going to church, but I don't go to church because that's where I feel like I need to worship. I've recognized that that's not the case. I can worship at home. All of us kind of figured that out during 2020. I learned that on the walk. I learned that one of the best places for me to worship God is up in the mountains or in the desert and by myself, to be honest, because it's a very personal thing for me. And, but now like I do go to church for others because that's what it's about. It's about connecting with others and lifting each other up. And I don't necessarily feel drawn to be active in the sense where I'm taking on a calling or anything like that. But I'm just here to serve. And that's my perspective right now. I just want to be useful.
Are your records still in the church?
Yeah. They are.
Okay.
And I've thought about taking them out, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what would your response be to somebody who, one of the main criticisms we get in this position is, well, you have to stay in the church because the keys are in the church. The keys are in the church. What would you say to maybe somebody who says something like that?
Well, everyone's experience and their journey is different. And I personally believe that Joseph Smith taught this, that the kingdom of God and the church are two separate things. So your membership in the church doesn't reflect how God feels about you or your stance in the kingdom, because the truth is Christ saves us, not a membership in the church. I know that's gonna be really difficult for a lot of people to hear, but that's the truth. Like, there's nothing in scripture that talks about, the importance of membership in the church. Now, however, I do believe that the church is those who repent and come unto Christ. And I believe that there is a record being kept on the other side. And that is what's referenced in the scriptures, because I know that there is reference in that way, but it's not necessarily about, having a temple recommend. That's something that I really thought was key to my salvation. Christ is the key to my salvation, and he holds the keys. I personally believe that John the Beloved is still on the earth and he holds some of those keys. I don't know where he is or what he's up to. And so to believe that one man has the keys, I think for me, I was looking at it the wrong way. And so I come from the perspective now, like, how can I get authorized from God to personally exercise the priesthood? I look at it just totally different.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your navigating of the concept of temples, because especially for those of us who are single, for me, it was really hard to realize I am not going to get married in the temple. And that was my whole life and my whole goal. And, what did God teach you about temples, and how did you kind of navigate that?
My dad told me that when I was a little kid, I would walk up the stairs after church singing the song, I Want to See the Temple. I think that's what the primary song is.
I'd love to see the temple.
Yeah. That's what it is. Yeah. So that was always my focus. And so recognizing that the temples, even though they are beautiful structures, the most important temple that is on the earth is my body. And so taking care of my body is where the Spirit dwells, right? And so we talk about how the Spirit is in these temples that the church builds, and how that's how we can get close to Christ. No, it's my body is a temple, right? We know that, and we know that Christ needs to be able to dwell. And so that kind of ties into what we talked about earlier about cleansing the inner vessel and constantly striving to do that, right? So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I look at the temples as beautiful places, and there is a lot of truth in the temples, that can bring people closer to Christ or have a understanding of Christ. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that just about the initiatory and the endowment that are symbolic. For instance, if we can even go this far talking about this, I want you to think about the initiatory. What do we do in the initiatory? We cleanse it's supposed to be symbolic of the baptism of fire and the Holy Ghost, right? We're blessing these different parts of the body and the organ and everything. Well, that makes sense for us to do it for the living, but why would we do it for someone who's dead? Right? I mean, if that person is going to be resurrected with a perfect body, they don't need those blessings. Think about that. It makes no sense. That was one of the realizations I came to when I woke up to the church. I'm like, okay, first of all, we cannot do an ordinance for someone to receive a broken heart and contrite spirit. That's something that they need to develop. And personally for me, I think they need to develop in mortality, not in the spirit world. They need to develop, because otherwise, why couldn't we develop that in the presence of Christ? Why did we have to be separated from him in this life? And we could talk about Alma, I think it's 13, that kind of references this, and how we are not left to choose between good and evil in the presence of God. We're left to choose between good and evil when we're not in the presence of God. So there's just a lot of things about the endowment that I think are kind of mixed up, but there's still truth there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, those are some of the hard things that we have to navigate. And if Joseph Smith brought forth the Book of Mormon and restored the church, what do all those things mean now? And those are questions I get all the time from people. And I think that it's a journey that we're all navigating to find out the answers to those questions. So tell me a little bit about your relationship with Jesus Christ now, and what the fruits of your kind of coming out of the church are.
Yeah. So because of the experiences I've had in the last few years, I've grown to trust him way more. I've had to. And it's not like because I did so strongly in 2020 that just stays with me. Like I have to continue working on it. And so I try to put myself in situations where I can continue to exercise faith. I did another walk in Oahu last August where I was homeless for 7 days on Paradise. You know, that was challenging and really taught me to, you know, trust God's plan and, you know, to take care of me. And so it's much deeper now. I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest. I don't have it figured out, but I just know that I want to serve him and, you know, he is very much aware of me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, none of us have it all figured out. And one of the things about this podcast is that our stories are not over yet. There's so much more to learn and so much more to grow. And that's the journey that you're on. And I think it's awesome, the relationship that you've grown with Christ and learning how to trust him. So thank you, James, for coming on the podcast. It has been a pleasure learning your story. So I want to finish with a question that I ask everybody at the end of the podcast, which is, how do you find clarity? You've been on quite the walk, literally. How do you find clarity in your life now?
You know, I find it in so many different ways, through music and through just pausing and going on walks. Actually, in the morning, I'll usually walk for about 20, 30 minutes. And, you know, that is the best way for me to kind of clear my mind and allow God to speak to me, because our days just get so busy and we get so bombarded with things. I need that break from the world. And a lot of times I just try to do it without my phone or any kind of distractions. So that's how I find it.
Yeah, I love that so much, guys. Go on walks. It will help you to find clarity. Thank you so much, James, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
If you guys are interested in joining us for an episode of the Clarity Podcast where you share your story of how you have left mainstream religion to follow Jesus Christ, please feel free to reach out to me at clarity.podcast@gmail.com, or you can find me on my website at forgedinhisfire.com, or you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Forged in His Fire. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Clarity Podcast.